And welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined as usual by my co-host, Mat Mlodzinski. We are here with our first recap show, recapping every notable storyline from this past week. And we were supposed to do one last week, had some technical difficulties, so glad to be able to hop aboard this time around. We'll be giving our top 5 takeaways from this past week. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for content like this, like we've been doing our weekend game pick shows. Those have been a lot of fun, and we'll be continuing to do those throughout the year. But let's get into our takeaways from this past week. And there's no other place to start but the Purdue-Alabama game. Final score, Purdue 87, Alabama 78. Purdue coming out on top at home. And the takeaway is that doubting post Zach Edey Purdue may have been a mistake. That should say Purdue down there. Doubting post Zach Edey Purdue may have been a major mistake. Just the consistency that the Purdue program really has had pre-Zach Edey. I mean, they were a very good program before that. And then during the Zach Edey era, they were pretty incredible. Like some of those home records and just overall results and overall consistency metrics have been insane, but they go out, they beat Alabama due to their guard play, and that's just huge. And I think maybe some of us, including myself, including probably CB Review as a whole, and including the AP poll for sure, has underranked Purdue in the preseason.
Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at this. Braden Smith now goes into his first season, and first season without Zach Edey, right? And I think in the past, it was sort of like the safety blanket, right? Braden Smith's a great point guard, but he's got Zach Edey. So this year, it's his first challenge as an upperclassman now. What is he going to look like without the big man, without the star down low to give the ball to, right? And he still looked really, really, really good, and I want to stop doubting Braden Smith. Now, his shooting percentage, obviously, we can talk about the 6 of 18, but when you got 10 assists against an Alabama team that goes very deep into their bench, that's always going to be, pressuring and keeping up a high-tempo game, I think that you need to look to Braden Smith for that. But, Dan, I also want to talk about Clifford Omoruyi because it's been a problem. He's not even averaging 20 minutes per game, and he's picked up 14 fouls this season. I mean, he's fouling. He can't stay on the court. You know that Nate Oates doesn't want to play guys a ton. He wants to shuffle in and out and keep guys fresh, but you almost with Cliff, it's like he's shuffling him in and out because he can't stay out of foul trouble. And Purdue kind of escaped because of that. So look, if this game was on a neutral court, if Cliff is able to stay out of foul trouble, I think it's a much different result. But I think you still need to give Purdue their flowers.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know, by the way, about like the officiating crew? Is that the home team that kind of dictates that in these non-conference games? Because the reason I ask is, you can't really blame the officiating crew if that's the case. Like, the SEC officiating crew tends to call more fouls than the Big Ten, and it's an adjustment. You can't even say that, right?
I don't think you can. I think what you got to say is these teams played high-level basketball, and the officials try their best to maybe make sure that, they stay out of it. But I think also when you've got high-quality teams like this that just know exactly what to do, that understand how to get their players in position to make the refs make a call, that's a different story. I think that's kind of what I see from this, right? I mean, they know what they're doing. Sometimes refs just call fouls to overtake the show. I think in this case, these teams are so smart, they're almost forcing the refs to make calls.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of which, we'll talk about the Arizona game where they played Wisconsin. There was like 80-something free throws total. We'll talk about that in this show for sure. But just last thing on this game, Alabama really kind of struggling from beyond the arc. We talked about that in the pregame show. Nick pointed out that it was open threes that just weren't going down. And I think to a certain extent that was the case against Purdue as well. But Alabama's a team that's going to take a lot of threes, and they're supposed to be a very high-powered offense, and going 9 for 29 is not going to cut it. And finally, it really comes back to bite them on a big game and a loud road atmosphere. I mean, you got Sears who went 1 for 6. Right cell got going, but 0 for 4 from 0 for 4 from Stevenson, 1 for
Yep.
4 from Holloway. That's just, I mean, I think that, again, it's just poor variance in the beginning of the year, but it's definitely something to monitor because they're not going to go away from that game plan. It's going to be a lot of 3-point shots.
Yeah, look, I think both these teams are still really quality teams. I think that Purdue, we talked about it, right? We did our game picks, and I said this is a prove-it game for Purdue, and boy, did they prove it.
Yeah.
And Alabama, people are going to be worried. I'm not really worried. I think as long as you can get Cliff in better position where he's not fouling all the time, that's the biggest key for Bama going forward.
All right, let's talk Champions Classic. Let's talk the second game in particular because we had Duke play Kentucky. Kentucky wins that one 77-72. I have a rule. I kind of copied this from a college football podcast I really like from this guy, Late Kick Josh Pate. And he says when he talks about games, he always talks about the winners first. And I really want to echo that because before I kind of talk about Duke and the way they lost, I want to give Kentucky their flowers. Kentucky, like I said, winning 77-72. Big win for them. I think there's a lot of life in the Mark Pope era. I think there's a lot to like about the way he runs his team. I think he's a lot better of an X's and O's guy than Calipari was. And I think he doesn't have his roster yet, but he's already clearly going to make some good things from his roster this college basketball season. So I really want to give Kentucky their flowers in that respect. As far as Duke is concerned, Cooper Flagg kind of made the headlines for mixed reasons. He really had a good game on the stat sheet to start. At least the first 38 minutes, he had 26 points and 11 rebounds. Then down the stretch, he had a couple blunders. I think he missed a shot. I think it was a nice jump hook. He got in good position, then missed it. And then the last possession, he turns it over pretty poorly. And to complicate matters further, then they had Kentucky had a chance. I'm sorry, Duke had a chance to get a last possession off of a Kentucky missed free throw. I think they were down 3, I want to say. And he gets boxed out for the offensive rebound, and they have to foul, and then that ends. That's where you get your 77-72 final. So Cooper Flagg, I think we have to acknowledge that he's 17 years old. There is room to improve on defense. There is room to improve his efficiency on offense, but I think you got to give the kid a break. Nothing really changed my opinion on him. He's just under the spotlight that much. He's going to get micro-analyzed,
Yeah, look, I mean, both things can be true, that he's an unbelievable talent, that he is kind of already proven that he deserves to have all the hype around him because he's made his shots. He's looked exciting out there. There's a reason that everyone's talking about Cooper Flagg, right? But it also can be true that he's, like you said, he's young. It's not going to be perfect from the start. It rarely is. You look at so few players. Sometimes the best players are the ones that are really highly rated but are just underneath the microscope a bit, right? Like you're not the top guy, you're not the second guy, but everyone knows you're a 5-star, but you don't have all the cameras following you around because maybe, you're not the guy on your team. You come into a good situation. Cooper Flagg just happens to come into a really good Duke team, but all the cameras are on him. He's the guy everyone's talking about. So it might just be, he might need to adjust to that, right? He played through a lot of this in high school, but it's a little bit different when you get to Cameron Indoor Stadium, when you're playing against better competition night in, night out. So, and obviously in the Champions Classic, I mean, that's as big as it gets in the non-conference, right? So, look, hats off to Cooper Flagg. He's played well, but let's just be patient, right?
Yeah. Con Canepo, by the way, 6 of 20 from the field. Everybody likes to talk about Cooper Flagg. Well, I think Canepo is the one that a lot of the people, in the know say he's going to lead the team in scoring. So no one's talking about his 6 for 20, just pointing that one out there as well. But moving on to our third takeaway, this one, interesting. So I think that Wisconsin and Arizona State are actually sneaky, pretty decent, pretty good. These are two programs both of us admittedly were very low on in the preview episodes when we did our top 100 CBB rank, and both of them impress these past couple weeks. It starts with Wisconsin. They got a big win over Alabama, final score 103 to 88. A ton of free throws in that game. I mean, in particular, you talk about John Tanji, who's averaged like 2 points per game at Missouri last year and puts up 41. Even if he went 21 of 22 from the line, like that is incredible. Wisconsin scoring 100 points is incredible. Like, where the heck did that come from? So that's Wisconsin. And then Arizona State, they played Gonzaga close this past week. Then they got a neutral site win this year over Santa Clara, Grand Canyon. Not like amazing wins, but these are good mid-major programs. And being able to beat them is a lot more than I think most people expected out of Bobby Hurley. So 2 programs expected not to have great seasons and have done a lot better than their expectations 2 weeks into the year.
I know it might sound crazy, Dan, but I almost trust Arizona State more for their close loss to Gonzaga than I do for Wisconsin for their win over Arizona. That probably sounds really weird, right?
No, it sounds. I mean that's how the analytical models operate, right? It measures who your opponent is and how you played against them, and winning and losing is just a binary outcome that's almost irrelevant. But yeah, keep going on that.
I mean, I just look at Arizona. I mean, I don't think we thought that Arizona was going to be a great defensive team this season. And John Tonji's been on fire, but will he keep it up, right? I think that's the biggest question because you look at everyone else. Steven Crowell isn't putting up. It's not like he's improved a lot. I mean, he is what he is at this point. I think we thought he was going to be a lot better than maybe he actually turned out to be because of what he was like as a freshman and a sophomore and early on in his career. You look at the other guys on that team, like John Blackwell. I mean, they're playing at a high level, but I think it's all about what will John Tonji be able to do. I mean, he's shooting practically 50% from the three. He's pouring it in. The guy can't be stopped offensively, but is this going to last the whole season? It's been 4 games. I think you look at Arizona State, and it's a little bit different because you got some freshmen that are playing at a really high level, but it's not just one guy. I mean, you've got a lot of guys stepping up for this team. You've got point guard play. Alston Mason looks, I mean, I'm a big fan of his already. Just plays with a lot of burst, a lot of quickness, but he's not out of control when he plays, only averaging 1.8 turnovers per game in 33 minutes to lead the team. I mean, that's great play out of Alston Mason, a senior that comes into this team and is already just taking control, right? I mean, ASU, a lot to like about this team. They go deep. They've got a lot of – they've played, Dan, they're going about 10 deep. Guys that are playing at least 11 minutes a game. And I'm not sure who they're going to be able to cut out of this roster.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with that take. I think Arizona State's production so far is a lot more sustainable. You didn't even mention Jaden Quaintance, who has been incredible. Like, he's not averaging double digits yet. I think his offensive upside is kind of not even coming into full fruition yet, but you could see what he does on the defensive end, just his pure athleticism. Another freshman who's been awesome. I agree, but I think it's worth noting because I definitely gave Wisconsin a lot of crap. I did not expect them to come close to winning that game, and they end up winning by double digits, putting up 100 points. Like, Wisconsin basketball putting up 100 points. Come on. That's what we're talking about. So
their football team could take some notes because
yeah, I noticed that this weekend. It's like you can't have success and happiness in both basketball and football. Every single sport where like somebody picked up a big win in one sport, they ended up having a crashing loss in the other. I noticed that. Like, I was watching New Mexico, like they had their big win, then they had a pretty tough loss to St. John's. Just you could only have one.
Except Syracuse.
Okay, sure. Picking up some massive wins. Syracuse is like the worst 3-0 team I've ever seen, by the way. That was almost going to be one of the takeaways, but
and it does transition us into our next takeaway.
So ACC is increasingly becoming a 2-horse race. I just mentioned Syracuse. I don't think anybody really thought Syracuse was going to compete at the top, but more of the reason that we point this out is because Duke and UNC, they both actually lost this past week. UNC, we talked about Duke, and then there's UNC, but they lost to Kansas, taking them down to the wire. Yes, they have their issues, but I think when you play Kansas that close, I'm not going to give you too much blame. So Duke and UNC obviously still 1A, 1B, probably in that order. Aside from that, like, a lot of people liked Wake Forest as a dark horse. Wake took a pretty tough loss, even in their low major bye games. They've looked pretty bad. So I'm not going to say Wake Forest is number 3 now. Who is number 3? I think Pitt's looked pretty decent. but the best team they've played is West Virginia, albeit they've blown out everybody. I really liked Miami preseason. They haven't lost yet, so I don't know. I think it's between those two and then maybe Clemson, but Clemson did not look great against Boise State.
I think we still have to look at Wake Forest. I mean, they're playing at Xavier. That's a tough environment, and they've played 5 games. Like they've played a lot of games to start the season, and they already had the win over Michigan. So I'm not ready to rule out Wake Forest from still being there. I think it's a big week for Miami, Dan. I don't know if it's a 2-horse race just yet. I think I know where you're coming from. That look, right now Duke and UNC seem to be the only teams that we can even say anything about in the ACC. But Miami plays in the Charleston Classic this week. Let me preface this with this field sucks. Right? This is not a good field. We're not going to think that Miami is a Final Four team if they go 3-0 in this field. But there are semi-quality teams from a college basketball perspective, right? You look at the bracket that Miami's facing. They're going to face Drake to begin with. We know that Drake isn't the same Drake, but we still know that Drake has been a solid program over the years. So definitely probably Miami's toughest test so far. Then they'll get the winner if they win against Oklahoma State and Florida Atlantic. I think the FAU has been okay. I think Oklahoma State would be a better draw for them. And then on the bottom half of the bracket, Seton Hall, VCU, Vanderbilt, and Nevada. So Miami is clearly the best team. But they have an opportunity. You think otherwise?
No, I do think they're the better team, but I think like a bunch of those teams you just mentioned are not anywhere close to automatic wins. They could lose. They could go 1-2 in that. Like I think that's realistic. Wow. I don't think that's not my most likely outcome, but I think they could. Like Nevada, VCU, those are good teams.
Yeah, I mean, VCU is a good team, but if Miami goes 3-0, would you agree that they've joined that conversation? I'm not saying Final Four good, but at least ACC good, where you have to consider them top tier.
They're clearly number 3 if they win those games.
Okay,
unless Pitt does something to impress even more.
That's fair. I think Pitt's up there too for me. I agree.
It's a good enough field so that if they go 3-0, yeah, like. It's not like they're beating a bunch of top 25 teams. I actually had VCU in my top 25. I think that was the only one. But, yeah, like I think that those are good enough opportunities so that I would say, yeah, I think that's fair.
I don't see any other teams that can really – look, I know I mentioned Syracuse, but they going along those lines, and they've had some struggles to come to 3-0. But another team that I'm not projecting them to go 2-0, but they've got Texas – and then they've got either Texas Tech and St. Joe's.
Mm-hmm.
So Miami, much more likely they go 3-0. If Syracuse were to do that, are you buying into the hype?
If Syracuse does?
If they beat Texas and let's say St. Joe's or again, Texas Tech, I mean, that's a pretty even game.
They beat both?
Yeah.
Yeah. I that's legit. I mean, there's no indication from their first 3 games that that's what they're going to do. But sure, if they do that, then yeah, I'm down. Like those are 2 legit wins.
And look, I don't like putting bias into it, but I've obviously watched Syracuse, and this is the best offensive team I've seen Syracuse have possibly since they had Ty's battle, which was quite a while ago.
Yeah, I'll admit I've just been scoreboard watching with Syracuse. I haven't even seen any of their games, but
yeah,
this week.
And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I know that Syracuse isn't our talking point today, but I think that it is important to keep an eye on the Orange because defensively, they've got the potential to get better defensively. When you look at Eddie Lampkin dropping 5 assists per game at this rate at the big man spot, you've got J.J. Starling with 38 in the game against Youngstown State, albeit double overtime. He played almost every minute, so you got to have someone score points. But he's looked like a different player this year. Chris Bell hasn't even shot that well to begin the season. We all know what he's capable of from 3. And they've got other players on this team. Donnie Freeman, a 5-star freshman. He's played solid. You can see the potential there. I think that the Orange this year, I'm buying into the hype early on. And usually I'm not. Usually I'm like, this team, I don't trust it. But I think this might be the year.
Okay. I'll take your word for it. I mean, I know you're a little biased in that respect, but I also haven't watched too many minutes, probably like a couple minutes here and there of Syracuse ball. That's it, just because the score has been close with those bye games. But I'll take your word for it until I watch them this week. Another ACC team that is 3-0 is Virginia, and I don't even want to talk about Virginia necessarily, but the reason they are 3-0 is because they got pretty big. I don't even want to say it's a big win, but a notable win against Villanova. I will actually talk about Virginia for a second because, like I said, I want to talk about the winners first. And Virginia is running a new offense this year. Isaac McNeely is a lot more predicated. It's a lot more predicated on Isaac McNeely, I should say, getting him his looks, being creative with him off of ball screens, off of dribble handoff concepts. And I think that is huge for their offensive ceiling. And we saw that against Villanova. On the other hand, Villanova that loss was pretty bad. Like, this is one small thing, but the fact that they were playing drop coverage on a guy that has like no ability at the rim and is one of the most lethal 3-point shooters in the country. And all game, they just keep playing drop coverage on picks. And he keeps getting open threes off of the dribble. Like, what kind of scouting department do you have, Kyle Neptune, if that's your game plan? I don't understand. It's things like that throughout the year. They also have convincing losses, not just like close fluky losses, but convincing losses to St. Joe's. Maybe I'll forgive them for that because St. Joe's has a lot of upside. But then also Columbia and Virginia. Like, come on now. I think this could easily be considered the worst team in the Big East. Your other contestants, and I'll throw it to you, Matt, because you're a Big East guy, but DePaul, like, they already won more games than they won last year, so credit to them. I think Georgetown has some redeeming qualities. I think Butler's probably their biggest competition. They lost to Austin Peay. It's hard to really find some great things to say about Butler. But Villanova, man, what has happened? It's not getting better by year 3. It's getting worse by year 3 for Kyle Neptune.
I'll be honest, I don't think Villanova is the worst team in the Big East. I think that I'd give that to Seton Hall or Georgetown at this point in time.
Yeah, Seton Hall, I guess, yeah.
I think that Villanova is the worst program in the Big East. And what were you going to say?
No, like in the respect that if they continue to go under the direction that they're going, it will be the worst team for like the next 5 years running. Is that what you're saying?
I think I'm just saying, look, Villanova's just a mess in general. They should not be this bad.
Yeah, no.
Like, I watch games, and Eric Dixon,
he's good.
He's good, which means that Villanova should not be this bad because he's a very good player. They've got other talented players that have had success elsewhere. We should have looked when Max Shulga decommitted from his original commitment to transfer to Villanova and decided to go back to VCU. That was back in May. We probably should have said, you know what, Villanova's going to have a really bad season this year because, I mean, to be the Villanova brand that you are and to lose out on a recruit like Max Shulga who decides to return to a good VCU team, but by no means is VCU Florida Atlantic, where they said, let's run it back from our Final Four run. I think we should have taken that as a clear indication that the problems at Villanova might run much more deeper than Kyle Neptune. I'm not saying that there's stuff behind the scenes that we need to be investigating. I'm saying that it doesn't seem like the players are buying into Kyle Neptune. It doesn't seem like Kyle Neptune is buying into Kyle Neptune. Like, everything that could go wrong is going wrong for Villanova.
Here's my diagnosis of the problem, right? I think that Jay Wright did things a very certain way and a very unique way. And Jay Wright was very, very, very good at the way he did it.
Yeah.
He didn't do it the conventional way.
No.
And when it's not Jay Wright, I don't know if I've made this take on this podcast before, but if it's not Jay Wright doing those things and it's somebody else trying to do a thing that only Jay Wright could do, that's the issue right there. And I think that's really been the case with Jay Wright's disciples. Like, the coaching tree for Jay Wright has not been nearly as successful as the coaching tree for other big-time coaches that have had equal success to Jay Wright. I think to a certain extent that's Tony Bennett. Tony Bennett has Richie McKay at Liberty, who's doing very well, and we'll see about Ron Sanchez. But like, when you do things a very unique way, sometimes it's hard for one of the guys following you, one of your disciples, to be able to do it the same way when it's not literally you doing it. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. You're a legend of the game And not that Kyle Neptune is a nobody. I mean, he coached for a little bit before he got there, and obviously, like, Villanova knows who he is and everything. But on the grand scheme of things, Jay Wright is just way up here, and Kyle Neptune is just beginning. And I don't know what he's tried to change. I don't know all the ins and outs. I'm not a Villanova expert. We've got one on our team, Dylan Johnson. Shout out him. He's doing great over at FinFam Review, our Villanova page over on Twitter. Maybe he can answer more because he's seen this team. He knows it. He should see the difference. And what's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Offensively, Villanova, the offense just looks like the guys have never even touched a basketball before.
Yeah.
I mean, it's slow. No one's moving. I watched one possession where the point guard had the ball at the top, and I don't think I saw any of the other four players move, and he was just dribbling for 15 seconds. And this is in the middle of the game. This is not at the end to save time. This was in the middle of just a regular game. And that is just bad basketball.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to be dribbling and waiting for something to set up. It's one thing where you got two guys in the corner, two guys in the wing, you up top, you're dribbling the basketball, no one is moving. That's LA Fitness basketball.
That's what I do in pickup when I'm like gassed and lazy.
Yeah. And we're seeing them out there. And I'm just wondering, I'm like, are you going to run a play? Do you not know where you need to be on the court? Like, what's the game plan here?
Yeah.
And it felt like I saw that, you can get out and transition all you want, but it felt like that wasn't the only time that I saw that. There were numerous times where, look, there's a difference between a slow offense and an offense that just isn't even moving. And that's what Villanova's offense looks like right now.
I think the last thing I want to say is I was very skeptical of I'm not patting myself on the back. This wasn't a hot take, but I was very skeptical of the Kyle Neptune hire at the time. Like, he wasn't very good in the A10. So I don't know, but it really stinks. I'm glad my boys came out on top. It's not like beating Villanova by 10 is now all of a sudden changing my perception of the season, but it's better than losing. So I'll give them credit. But that will do it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and interact with these episodes. Be sure to follow us on the socials as well. We're cranking out a ton of content every day, so be sure to keep up with us there. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and take care.